The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Blackwood Manor as Emma Hartwell stood before the towering iron gates. Her worn suitcase felt heavy in her hand, though it contained little more than a few simple dresses and the memory of her father's bakery. 24 hours ago, she had been kneading dough in the back room of that small shop, flour dusting her apron, dreaming of nothing more than expanding the business someday. Now she was about to become the wife of one of the wealthiest men in the city, Mr. Thornton. The Blackwood family lawyer had appeared at the bakery 3 days prior with news that shattered her simple life. Old Thomas Blackwood, patriarch of the Blackwood fortune, had passed away 6 months earlier. In his will, he had included a peculiar clause that left everyone stunned. His only son, Sebastian, would inherit the vast estate and control of the family business empire under one condition. He must marry Emma Hartwell, the daughter of the baker who had once saved Thomas from freezing to death during a winter storm. Years ago, Emma remembered that night vividly. She had been 14, helping her father close the shop when they found the elderly man collapsed in the snow outside. They brought him in, warmed him by the fire, and her father refused payment for the bread and soup they provided. Thomas had been traveling alone after his car broke down, and without their help, they would have died in the cold now. Standing before the mansion, Emma understood the weight of that kindness. Thomas Blackwood had never forgotten. In his final act, he sought to teach his arrogant son a lesson in humility by binding him to the daughter of a humble baker. Emma had tried to refuse. She wanted no part of this world of wealth and power. But Mr. Thornton explained that her refusal would mean Sebastian lost everything. And she thought of her ailing father who needed expensive medical treatment. The lawyer had assured her that Sebastian would provide for her family regardless of her decision. But Emma's conscience would not allow her to be the reason. Someone lost their inheritance. Sebastian Blackwood had other thoughts entirely. When he learned of the will's conditions, his rage echoed through every room of the manor. How dare his father trap him in such a manner? How dare he force him to marry some common girl from a bakery? Sebastian had built his reputation on being shrewd, calculating, and above all, in control. This arrangement made him feel like a puppet dancing on strings, pulled by a dead man. The wedding was arranged quickly and quietly. No grand celebration, no hundreds of guests. Just a small ceremony in the manor's private chapel with a handful of witnesses. Emma wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Pemberton, the head housekeeper, had hastily altered to fit her. It was beautiful in its simplicity, but Emma felt like an imposter wearing it. Sebastian stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored black suit. His jaw clenched tight, his green eyes cold as winter frost. He did not look at Emma as she walked down the short aisle. He stared straight ahead as if willing himself to be anywhere else. The ceremony proceeded with mechanical precision. The priest spoke words about love and commitment that rang hollow in the tense silence. When it came time to exchange vows, Sebastian's voice was flat and emotionless. Emma's voice trembled slightly, but she spoke clearly, determined not to show weakness. Then came the moment for the rings. As Sebastian slid the gold band onto Emma's finger, he leaned close to her ear. His breath was warm against her skin, but his words were ice. "Don't fool yourself. You're just a signed contract." The words struck Emma like a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, tears threatened to spill. But she had learned resilience in her years working in the bakery, dealing with difficult customers and long hours. She blinked the tears away, lifted her chin, and slid the ring onto his finger with steady hands. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. The priest pronounced them husband and wife. Sebastian did not kiss her. He simply turned and walked down the aisle. Leaving Emma to follow in his wake like an afterthought, the reception in the manor's dining room was a cold affair. Sebastian sat at the head of the long table, speaking only to Mr. Thornton about business matters. Emma sat beside him, untouched by conversation, feeling like a ghost at her own wedding. The food was exquisite, prepared by the manor-skilled cook, but it tasted like ash in her mouth. Victoria Blackwood, Sebastian's mother, watched from her wheelchair at the far end of the table. She had been too ill to attend the ceremony in the chapel, but she insisted on being present for the meal. Her blue eyes, so like her son's, studied Emma with an expression that was difficult to read. Unlike Sebastian, Victoria had not protested the marriage. Some whispered that she had known about the will's contents before Thomas died and had approved after the meal. Sebastian stood without a word and left the room. Emma remained seated, unsure what to do. Mrs. Pemberton approached gently and guided her upstairs to what would be her new bedroom. It was a beautiful room with tall windows overlooking the gardens, furnished with antiques and soft fabrics. But it was not the master bedroom. Sebastian had made it clear that this would be a marriage in name only. That first night, Emma sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself to cry. She cried for the life she had left behind, for her father who would now receive the medical care he needed, but at such a cost to her own happiness, and for the cruel words that still echoed in her mind. Just a signed contract. Is that all she would ever be? But as the tears dried, something hardened inside her. Emma Hartwell had never been one to surrender. If Sebastian Blackwood thought he could break her spirit with his coldness, he would discover he had underestimated her. She would fulfill her role with dignity and grace, not for him, but for herself and for the memory of Thomas Blackwood, who had seen something worth protecting in her family years ago. The next morning, Emma rose early, as was her habit from years of bakery work. She dressed in one of her simple dresses and ventured downstairs. The manor was vast and intimidating, but she refused to hide in her room. She found the kitchen, where the cook, a kind woman named Beatrice, was preparing breakfast. Beatrice looked surprised to see the new mistress of the house in the kitchen, but welcomed her warmly. Emma learned that the staff had been instructed by Sebastian not to treat her any differently than they would any other member of the household, which most interpreted as permission to be distant and cold. But Beatrice, who had worked for Thomas Blackwood for 30 years, remembered the night he came home with stories of the baker and his daughter who had saved his life. As they talked, Emma began to understand the layout of her new prison. The manor was enormous, with dozens of rooms, most of which were rarely used. Sebastian spent most of his time either in his study or away at his office in the city. Victoria remained in her rooms on the second floor, too weak to move about much. The staff were efficient but distant, following Sebastian's example. Emma also learned about Sebastian himself. Beatrice spoke carefully, but Emma could read between the lines. Sebastian had been a different person before his father's death. Ambitious, yes, and sometimes arrogant, but not cruel. Thomas's passing had changed him. He had loved his father deeply, despite their differences, and the will's conditions felt like a betrayal from beyond the grave. Understanding this did not excuse Sebastian's behavior, but it gave Emma context. She was not just battling his pride, but his grief and anger as well. It would not be easy to survive in this house, let alone find any measure of peace. But Emma had made her choice when she accepted this arrangement. She would see it through. Over the following weeks, Emma established a routine. She rose early, explored the manor and its grounds, and found ways to make herself useful. She began visiting Victoria daily, reading to her when the older woman was too tired to hold a book herself. Victoria responded with warmth that her son lacked, and slowly a genuine affection grew between them. Emma also took interest in the manor's library. A vast room filled with thousands of books. She had always loved reading but rarely had time for it at the bakery. Now she devoured novels and histories, educating herself about the world she had been thrust into. Knowledge, she believed, would be her armor in this new life. Sebastian noticed her presence, but said nothing. He passed her in hallways without acknowledgement, ate meals in his study rather than the dining room, made it clear through his absence that she was unwelcome in his life. Yet, sometimes Emma caught him watching her from a distance, his expression unreadable. What was he thinking? Did he resent her presence, or was there something else beneath that cold exterior? Emma could not know that Sebastian was fighting his own internal battle. He had expected her to be grasping and ambitious, eager to claim her place as mistress of Blackwood Manor. Instead, she moved through his home like a quiet stream, gentle but persistent, wearing away at his assumptions. She did not demand anything, did not complain about her treatment, and showed kindness to everyone she encountered, from Victoria to the lowest servant. It irritated him that he noticed these things. It irritated him more that he found himself looking for her in the rooms of the manor. his day feeling incomplete if he did not catch at least a glimpse of her. He told himself it was mere curiosity about how long she would maintain this act of martyred patience. But deep down in a place he refused to examine too closely, Sebastian was beginning to suspect that Emma Hartwell was no act at all. The contract that bound them was legal and absolute, lasting until death or mutual agreement to dissolve. But another contract was being written in those early days, one made of glances and silences, small kindnesses, and quiet observations. Neither Emma nor Sebastian knew it yet, but the real terms of their marriage were still being negotiated, and the outcome would surprise them both. The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Blackwood Manor as Emma made her way down the grand staircase. 3 months had passed since the wedding. The Cold War between her and Sebastian had settled into a predictable pattern. He ignored her existence except when absolutely necessary, and she maintained her dignity through quiet perseverance. This morning, however, something was different. The usual stillness of the manor was disrupted by raised voices coming from Sebastian's study. Emma paused in the hallway, not intending to eavesdrop. But the door was slightly ajar, and the conversation was impossible to ignore. Sebastian, came the smooth voice of Richard Sterling, a business associate Emma had met briefly at a dinner party weeks ago. The Singapore deal is too risky. Pull out now before you lose everything. I've analyzed every angle, Sebastian replied, his tone sharp with frustration. The projections are solid. This expansion will secure our position in the Asian markets for the next decade. Or it will bankrupt you, Richard countered. Your father would never have taken such a gamble. The mention of Thomas Blackwood hung in the air like smoke. Emma heard papers rustling, then Sebastian's voice, colder now. My father isn't here to make these decisions. I am, and I've made my choice. Richard's footsteps approached the door, and Emma quickly moved away, not wanting to be caught listening. As Richard emerged, he nearly collided with her. His eyes flickered with something calculating before he smiled politely. Mrs. Blackwood, always a pleasure. Emma nodded but said nothing. There was something about Richard Sterling that made her skin crawl, though she could not pinpoint why. He had always been courteous to her, yet his courtesy felt like a mask covering something darker. After Richard left, Emma continued to the conservatory where Victoria spent her mornings. The older woman's health had been declining slowly. Emma had taken it upon herself to provide companionship during these difficult days. She found Victoria sitting by the windows, wrapped in blankets despite the warmth of the room. You heard them arguing, Victoria said without preamble. Her voice was weak, but her mind remained sharp. Emma settled into the chair beside her. I didn't mean to. Richard Sterling is a snake, Victoria said bluntly. He's been trying to position himself as Sebastian's right hand since Thomas died. But he doesn't have my son's best interests at heart. He wants control of the company for himself. Emma absorbed this information quietly. She knew little about business matters, but she understood human nature well enough. Why doesn't Sebastian see it? Because he's blind with grief and anger, Victoria replied, reaching out to take Emma's hand. Her grip was frail but warm. My husband's will wounded Sebastian deeply. He sees your presence as a reminder of his father's lack of faith in him. It's not rational, but grief rarely is. Emma felt her throat tighten. He despises me, oh child. He fears you. Victoria's blue eyes met Emma's with startling clarity. You represent everything he's been taught to dismiss. Kindness without agenda, strength without arrogance, love without condition. You terrify him because you challenge everything he believes about how the world works. Before Emma could respond, Mrs. Pemberton appeared at the door, her expression troubled. Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Sebastian, is asking for you. In his study, Emma's heart skipped. In 3 months, Sebastian had never requested her presence directly. She excused herself from Victoria and made her way to the study, her mind racing with possibilities. Sebastian stood by the window, his back to the door. He didn't turn when she entered. Close the door, he said quietly. Emma did as instructed, then waited in silence. I need your help, Sebastian said finally, the words seeming to cost him physically. There's a dinner tomorrow night. Investors from Singapore. They're traditional, family-oriented. They'll expect to meet my wife. And you want me to play the role? Emma said, keeping her voice neutral. Sebastian finally turned to face her. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. I want you to be present. To be yourself. They'll see through any performance. Duh. Admission surprised Emma. It was the closest Sebastian had come to acknowledging that she possessed any value beyond the contract that bound them. I'll do it, she said simply. Something flickered in Sebastian's eyes, relief, perhaps, or maybe suspicion. There will be 7 courses. The Chens are particular about etiquette. Mrs. Pemberton will help you prepare. I grew up in a bakery, Sebastian, not a cave, Emma replied with a hint of steel in her voice. I know which fork to use. For the first time since their wedding, Sebastian's lips twitched with something that might have been amusement. The moment passed quickly, his expression hardening again. Wear something appropriate. Not those plain dresses you favor. Criticism stung, but Emma refused to show it. Is there anything else? Sebastian hesitated, as if wrestling with something internal. Just be ready at 7. Emma left the study with her composure intact, but once in the hallway, she leaned against the wall and exhaled slowly. Tomorrow night would be a test, not just of her social skills, but of her ability to stand beside Sebastian as an equal. Even when he refused to see her as one, the next day passed in a flurry of preparation. Mrs. Pemberton, warming to Emma over the months, helped her select a dress from the wardrobe that Sebastian had ordered filled with clothes Emma had never worn. They chose a deep emerald gown that complemented Emma's dark hair and brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. It was elegant, without being ostentatious. Exactly the right tone for the evening. As Emma studied herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back. She had always been pretty in a simple way, but this dress transformed her into something else entirely. For a moment she allowed herself to imagine Sebastian seeing her this way, truly seeing her, and something in his cold expression softening. Then she pushed the thought away. Such fantasies were dangerous. The dinner guests arrived precisely at 7. Mr. and Mrs. Chen were in their 60s, dignified and gracious. Their son David accompanied them, a successful architect in his early 30s. They greeted Sebastian warmly, then turned to Emma with open curiosity. Mrs. Blackwood, Mrs. Chen said, taking Emma's hands in hers. How wonderful to finally meet you. Sebastian has told us so much about you. Emma glanced at Sebastian, surprised. He maintained his neutral expression, but she thought she detected a faint tension in his jaw. The dinner proceeded smoothly. Emma found herself genuinely enjoying the Chen's company. They were intelligent, well-traveled, possessed a warmth that reminded her of her own parents. Mrs. Chen asked about Emma's background, and rather than hide her humble origins, Emma spoke honestly about growing up in the bakery, about learning to bake bread at her father's side, about the satisfaction of creating something with her own hands. Sebastian watched her throughout the meal, his expression unreadable. Emma noticed him watching, but focused on being present with their guests, answering questions, asking her own, facilitating conversation between Sebastian and Mr. Chen when business topics arose. It was during the 5th course that the evening took an unexpected turn. David Chen, who had been quiet through most of the meal, suddenly addressed Emma directly. Mrs. Blackwood, I understand you've taken an interest in the Manor's gardens. My mother mentioned she saw you sketching the fountain last week. Emma blinked in surprise. She had indeed been drawing the fountain, an old habit from childhood when she couldn't afford paints and made do with pencil and paper. She hadn't realized anyone had noticed. Yes, I enjoy sketching. The gardens here are beautiful. David is quite the artist himself, Mrs. Chen interjected proudly. Perhaps you could show Emma some of your work. Before Emma could respond politely, Sebastian spoke, his voice cutting through the pleasant atmosphere like a blade. I'm sure Emma has more important things to do than look at sketches. The table fell silent. Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from embarrassment for herself, but from anger at Sebastian's rudeness toward their guests. Mrs. Chen's smile faltered slightly, and Mr. Chen's expression cooled. Emma made a split-second decision. She placed her hand over Sebastian's on the table, a gesture that appeared affectionate but allowed her to squeeze his hand hard enough to make her point. "What my husband means," she said smoothly, her smile never wavering, "is that I would be delighted to see David's work, but perhaps after dinner when we can give it proper attention. Sebastian tends to be protective of my time, aren't you, darling?" Sebastian stared at her, caught between irritation and something else. Emma held his gaze steadily, communicating silently that she would not let him sabotage this evening. Finally, he nodded slightly. "Of course. I only want to ensure you're not overwhelmed." The tension eased, and conversation resumed. But Emma kept her hand on Sebastian's for another moment, feeling his pulse rapid under her fingers before she withdrew. The rest of the dinner passed without incident. The Chens departed with promises to finalize the Singapore deal the following week. Clearly impressed by both Sebastian's business acumen and, Emma suspected, by the partnership they believed existed between him and his wife. After the guests left, Sebastian poured himself a drink in the study. Emma appeared in the doorway, still wearing the emerald dress. "You're welcome," she said quietly. Sebastian took a long sip before responding. "I didn't ask for your intervention. No, you asked for my presence. I gave you more than that. I gave you credibility." Emma stepped into the room, her earlier restraint dissolving into honest frustration. "Mrs. Chen told me during dinner that they almost canceled tonight. They'd heard rumors about our marriage, about how you treat me. They came to assess whether you were stable enough to trust with their investment." Sebastian's jaw clenched. "And you convinced them. I convinced them that despite your arrogance, you have someone by your side who can balance you. Someone who can smooth the edges you leave rough." Emma moved closer, her eyes flashing. "You may see me as just a contract, Sebastian, but the rest of the world sees me as your wife. And whether you like it or not, that means my actions reflect on you, just as yours reflect on me." "I never asked you to care about my business," Sebastian said. But his voice lacked its usual conviction. "You didn't have to ask. It's what partners do." Emma turned to leave, then paused. "Your father didn't trap you in this marriage to punish you, Sebastian. He did it because he knew you needed someone who would stand beside you even when you pushed them away. Someone who would see the man you could be, not just the man you've become." "I'm beginning to think he was right." She left. Before he could respond, her heart pounding. In her room, Emma removed the beautiful dress and hung it carefully in the wardrobe. Her hands were shaking, whether from anger or something else. She couldn't say. What she didn't know was that Sebastian stood in his study for a long time after she left, staring at the door she'd walked through, her words echoing in his mind. For the first time since his father's death, he felt something crack in the wall he'd built around his heart, and it terrified him. The following weeks brought subtle changes to Blackwood Manor. Sebastian didn't apologize for his behavior at the dinner, but his treatment of Emma shifted almost imperceptibly. He began taking meals in the dining room again rather than his study. He asked her opinion on minor household matters. Once, when she mentioned a book she was reading, he brought her another by the same author the next day. Leaving it outside her door without comment, Emma noticed these small gestures, but didn't acknowledge them directly. She continued her routines, caring for Victoria, managing the household staff who had grown to respect her, reading in the library, sketching in the gardens. But she was aware, always, of Sebastian's presence, of his eyes following her when he thought she wasn't looking. Victoria's health continued to decline. The doctors could do little except make her comfortable. Emma spent hours each day at her bedside, reading aloud, talking about her childhood, listening to Victoria's stories about Sebastian as a boy. The older woman spoke of a time before business and wealth had hardened her son, when he had been passionate about music and art, when he had dreamed of being more than just his father's successor. "He gave up everything he loved to become what was expected," Victoria said one afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. And then Thomas's will made him feel like even that sacrifice wasn't enough. Like his father didn't believe in him after all. Emma understood then the depth of Sebastian's pain. He wasn't just angry about being forced to marry her. He was mourning the loss of his father's faith in him, questioning whether he had wasted his life trying to earn approval that would never come. That night, Emma found Sebastian in the music room, a space she had never seen him enter before. He sat at the grand piano, his fingers resting on the keys, but not playing. She stood in the doorway, uncertain whether to intrude. "My mother told you," Sebastian said without turning around. "She loves you," Emma replied simply. "She wants me to understand you, and do you understand me?" Sebastian finally looked at her, his green eyes reflecting the lamplight. Emma considered the question carefully. "I understand that you're hurt. I understand that I represent that hurt in a way that makes it impossible for you to see me clearly. But I also understand that you're more than your pain, Sebastian. Whether you remember that or not." Sebastian's fingers pressed down on the keys, producing a single mournful note that hung in the air between them. "I used to play. Before you could play again."
What would be the point?
His voice was hollow. Emma crossed the room and sat beside him on the piano bench, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "The point is that some parts of ourselves shouldn't be sacrificed, no matter what's expected. Some things we should hold on to because they make us who we are." Sebastian looked at her, really looked at her, for perhaps the first time since their wedding. In the soft light, Emma's face held such earnest compassion that something inside him finally broke. "I've been cruel to you," he said quietly. "Yes," Emma agreed, not flinching from the truth. "You didn't deserve it." "No, I didn't." Sebastian's hand moved to cover hers on the piano bench. The touch was gentle, questioning. "I don't know how to undo what I've done." "You start by stopping," Emma said. "You stop seeing me as the enemy. You stop punishing me for your father's choices. You stop hiding behind anger, because it's easier than facing grief." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, a gesture so tender it made Emma's breath catch. "What if I don't know how to be anything else anymore?" "Then I'll remind you," Emma said softly. "That's what partners do." Sebastian lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. It was the first time he had willingly touched her since their wedding. The first gesture of affection he had offered freely. Emma felt tears prick her eyes but held them back. They sat together in the music room as moonlight streamed through the windows, neither speaking, simply existing in shared space without warfare, without walls. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Winter descended on Blackwood Manor with brutal efficiency, coating the grounds in snow and ice. Inside, however, something was thawing. The fragile peace that had begun in the music room had grown slowly over the following months. Sebastian still maintained his emotional distance, but the cruelty had faded. Replaced by something closer to careful respect, Emma had learned to read the subtle signs of Sebastian's moods. She knew when he needed space, and when his silence was actually a request for company. They had developed an unspoken routine. Breakfast together in the morning room, separate afternoons. Dinner in the dining room, where they discussed everything from politics to literature. Never anything too personal, but no longer hostile. Victoria's condition had stabilized somewhat, though she remained weak. She watched the gradual shift between her son and daughter-in-law with quiet satisfaction, saying nothing but missing nothing. One afternoon, as Emma read to her, Victoria interrupted suddenly. "He's falling in love with you," she said, her blue eyes bright despite her frailty. "He doesn't know it yet, but I do." Emma's hand trembled slightly as she marked her place in the book. "Victoria, please don't." "Don't what?" "Tell you the truth?" Victoria's laugh turned into a cough, and Emma quickly helped her sip water. When she could speak again, Victoria continued, "I've known my son for 35 years. I've seen him with countless women who wanted him for his money or status. He never looked at any of them the way he looks at you when you're not watching. He looks at me as an obligation he's learning to tolerate," Emma said. But her voice lacked conviction. "He looks at you like a man who's discovered something precious but doesn't trust himself to hold it without breaking it." Victoria squeezed Emma's hand. "Be patient with him, dear. The walls he's built took years to construct. They won't come down overnight." That conversation haunted Emma for days. She found herself watching Sebastian more carefully, looking for signs of what Victoria had described. Sometimes she thought she saw it as softness in his expression when he thought she wasn't looking. A hesitation before he spoke, as if he were choosing words with unusual care. The way his hand would move toward hers across the dinner table before he caught himself and drew back. But Emma had learned not to trust hope. Hope was dangerous. It made you vulnerable, and vulnerability led to pain. She had survived these months by maintaining emotional distance, by not expecting anything from Sebastian beyond basic civility. To hope for more felt like stepping into quicksand. The crisis came in January, swift and devastating. Emma was in the library when she heard the commotion. Raised voices, hurried footsteps, doors slamming. She rushed to the entrance hall to find Sebastian standing amid scattered papers, his face ashen, while Mr. Thornton spoke in urgent, hushed tones. "What's happened?" Emma asked, but no one answered. Sebastian pushed past her without a word, heading for his study. Mr. Thornton looked at Emma with something like pity before gathering the papers and, following Mrs. Pemberton, appeared at Emma's elbow. "It's bad, Mrs. Blackwood. Something about the Singapore deal. I heard Mr. Thornton mention fraud." Emma's stomach dropped. She made her way to Sebastian's study, not bothering to knock before entering. Sebastian stood behind his desk, hands braced on the surface, staring at documents spread before him as if they were written in a foreign language. Mr. Thornton stood nearby, his usually composed face grave. "What happened?" Emma asked again, closing the door behind her. This time Sebastian answered, his voice hollow. "Richard Sterling. He's been embezzling funds from the Singapore project for months. Millions of pounds. He structured it to look like I authorized the transfers. When the Chens discovered the missing money, they went to the authorities. There's going to be an investigation." Emma's mind raced. "But you didn't authorize it. There must be proof." "The documents have my signature," Sebastian said, finally looking up at her. His eyes were devastated. "Forged, obviously, but proving that will take time we don't have. The Chens are furious. They've withdrawn from the deal entirely. Other investors are panicking. By tomorrow morning, I'll be facing criminal charges and financial ruin." "Where is Sterling now?" Emma asked, her voice sharp. "Gone," Mr. Thornton replied. "Vanished with the money. We've contacted the authorities, but he had this plan for months. He could be anywhere by now." Sebastian sank into his chair, the weight of catastrophe bowing his shoulders. "My father built this company over 40 years. I've destroyed it in less than one." Emma moved around the desk and knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. They were ice cold. "You didn't destroy anything. Sterling did, and we're going to prove it." Sebastian looked at her as if she'd spoken nonsense. Emma, this isn't your fight." "I'm your wife," Emma said firmly. "That makes it my fight whether you like it or not." "A wife you never wanted," Sebastian replied bitterly. "A contract you were forced into. You should leave now, before this scandal destroys you too." Emma's grip tightened on his hands. "I'm not leaving. Why?" Sebastian's voice broke on the word. "Why would you stay? I've given you nothing but contempt and coldness. I've treated you as an obligation, something to be endured. You owe me nothing." Emma felt her own eyes fill with tears, but she didn't look away. "Because despite everything, despite the contract and the cruelty and the loneliness, somewhere along the way I started to care about you, Sebastian Blackwood. And I don't abandon people I care about when things get difficult." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Sebastian stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, truly seeing her. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "Probably not," Emma agreed with a watery smile. "But that's irrelevant right now. What matters is proving your innocence and stopping Sterling." Over the next 72 hours, Emma saw a side of Sebastian she had never witnessed. He was brilliant in crisis, methodical and focused despite the pressure. Together with Mr. Thornton, they worked around the clock, reconstructing financial records, identifying discrepancies, building a timeline of Sterling's deception. Emma refused to leave Sebastian's side. She brought him meals he barely touched, coffee he drank mechanically, and her steady presence that anchored him when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm. She also made calls. Using the connections she had developed through her work with various charities Victoria had introduced her to. One of those connections led to a forensic accountant who specialized in fraud cases. The accountant, a brilliant woman named Patricia Green, arrived at the manor within hours of Emma's call. She spent 2 days analyzing the documents, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Finally, she sat back with a satisfied expression. Mr. Sterling was clever, but not clever enough, Patricia announced. These signatures are excellent forgeries. But the digital timestamps on the authorization documents don't match the dates they were supposedly signed. He used software to backdate them, but he didn't account for the metadata embedded in the electronic files. I can prove these documents were created months after Mr. Blackwood supposedly signed them. The relief in the room was palpable. Mr. Thornton immediately contacted the authorities with this new evidence. Within hours, the investigation's focus shifted from Sebastian to Sterling. An international warrant was issued for Sterling's arrest, but the damage to the company's reputation remained. Investors were still skittish, partners uncertain. The Chens, while apologetic once Sebastian's innocence was established, had already moved their business elsewhere. Blackwood Industries faced its most uncertain future in decades. That night, after Patricia and Mr. Thornton had left, Emma found Sebastian standing alone in the conservatory, staring out at the snow-covered gardens. She approached quietly and stood beside him, their shoulders touching. "We survived," she said softly. "For now," Sebastian replied, "but the company is in shambles. Even if we avoid criminal charges, the financial damage is catastrophic. I may have to sell assets, downsize operations. Everything my father built could still be lost. Or," Emma said carefully, "it could be rebuilt. Differently, perhaps, but not necessarily worse." Sebastian turned to look at her, his expression weary, but open in a way she had never seen. "You amaze me," he said quietly. "After everything I've put you through, you stand here talking about rebuilding. Most people would have abandoned me the moment the scandal broke." "I'm not most people," Emma replied. "No," Sebastian agreed, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "You're extraordinary, and I've been a fool not to see it sooner." He drew her closer, his free hand coming up to frame her face. "Emma, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said months ago. Damn." Emma's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "What?" "That night at the altar, when I whispered those cruel words, I was trying to hurt you because I was hurting. I wanted you to be as miserable as I was. It's the worst thing I've ever done, and I've regretted it every day since." Sebastian's thumb traced her cheekbone. "You are not a contract. You have never been just a contract. You are the strongest, kindest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. And I am desperately, hopelessly in love with you." Emma's breath caught. "Sebastian, I know I have no right to your love in return," he continued quickly, as if afraid she would stop him. "I know I've forfeited any claim to your heart, but I need you to know that you've changed everything for me. You've reminded me what it means to be human, what it means to care about something beyond success and reputation. You've saved me in ways I didn't even know I needed saving." Tears streamed freely down Emma's face now. "You stupid, stubborn man," she whispered. "I fell in love with you months ago, despite everything, despite the walls you built, despite your determination to keep me at a distance. I saw glimpses of who you really were, and I couldn't help myself." Sebastian's expression transformed, hope and wonder replacing the despair that had haunted his features for days. "Say it again," he breathed. "I love you," Emma said clearly. "I love the man you are and the man you're becoming." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like Emma had imagined a first kiss with Sebastian would be. It wasn't careful or tentative. It was desperate and deep, filled with months of longing and regret and hope. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close as if he feared she might disappear. Emma melted into the embrace, her hands fisting in his shirt, kissing him back with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for how I treated you," he vowed. "Starting now." He pulled something from his poketa, small velvet box Emma had never seen before. Opening it revealed a ring, delicate and beautiful, with a single, perfect diamond surrounded by emeralds. "This was my grandmother's," Sebastian explained. "My father gave it to my mother when they got engaged. She wanted me to have it, to give to someone I truly loved. I'd like you to wear it. Not because a contract demands it, but because you choose to. Because I'm asking you, Emma Hartwell, to be my wife." Not on paper, but in truth. Emma looked at the ring, then at Sebastian's face, seeing vulnerability and love shining in his eyes. "We're already married," she pointed out, but she was smiling through her tears. "Then let me do it right this time," Sebastian said. "Let me stand before everyone who matters and tell them that I choose you. That you're not an obligation, but a gift. That I'm the luckiest man alive, because you saw something in me worth loving, even when I couldn't see it myself." Emma held out her left hand. Where the plain gold band from their forced wedding still circled her finger, Sebastian carefully removed it, replacing it with his grandmother's ring. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her.
Yes,
Emma whispered. Yes to everything. To rebuilding together, to facing whatever comes, to being partners in truth and not just on paper. Yes. They held each other in the conservatory as snow fell softly outside. Two people who had been forced together by circumstance, but who had found something far more valuable than obligation. They had found love. The following months were challenging. Rebuilding Blackwood Industries required difficult decisions and long hours. But Sebastian was no longer alone in facing these challenges. Emma became his true partner, offering insights from her unique perspective, supporting him through setbacks, celebrating victories alongside him. They organized a second wedding ceremony, small and intimate, in the Manor's chapel. This time, Sebastian's vows were spoken with tears in his eyes, his voice strong and sure as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Emma for the rest of his days. Emma's own vows were equally heartfelt, speaking of partnership, forgiveness, and choosing love even when it's difficult. Victoria, though weak, attended in her wheelchair, crying happy tears. Mrs. Pemberton and the household staff, who had watched Emma's quiet strength transform their home, witnessed the ceremony with genuine joy. When Sebastian kissed his bride this time, it was tender and public and filled with promise. In the months that followed, Sterling was eventually arrested in Monaco and brought back to face justice. The money was partially recovered, enough to stabilize the company's immediate future. The Chens, impressed by how Sebastian and Emma had handled the crisis together, reached out with a new proposal for a smaller but still significant partnership. Slowly, Blackwood Industries began to recover. Sebastian implemented changes his father would never have considered, including profit sharing with employees and community investment programs that Emma championed. The company became more than just a business. It became a force for good in the community, reflecting the values that Emma and Sebastian now shared. One evening, nearly a year after that first kiss in the conservatory, Sebastian found Emma in the library, curled up in her favorite chair with a book. He settled beside her, pulling her feet into his lap. "I was thinking," he said, absently massaging her feet, "about that night. The wedding night." Emma set down her book, raising an eyebrow. "Which one?" "The first one. When I said those terrible words," Sebastian's expression was serious. "I want to erase them. Replace them with something better." "You don't need to," Emma said gently. "That moment is part of our story. It shows how far we've come." "Maybe," Sebastian conceded, "but I still want to replace them." "So here's what I should have said that night." He took her hand, his grip firm and warm. "Emma Hartwell, you are not a contract. You are my salvation, my partner, my love. You are the woman who saw the best in me when I showed you my worst. You are everything I never knew I needed, and more than I ever deserved. And I will spend every day of my life grateful that fate brought you to me, even in the strangest of ways." Emma's eyes misted. "That's much better than the original version." "I thought so too," Sebastian said with a small smile. Then his expression grew more serious. "I mean every word, Emma. You changed my life. You changed me. Changed each other," Emma corrected, leaning forward to kiss him softly. "That's what love does." As winter gave way to spring, Blackwood Manor bloomed with more than just flowers. It bloomed with laughter and music, with Sebastian playing piano again, while Emma sketched in the conservatory, with Victoria strong enough to join them for dinner most nights, with staff who no longer walked on eggshells. It felt like part of a family. The manor that had once been a cold prison had transformed into a true home. And the marriage that had begun with a cruel whisper and a forced contract had become a love story for the ages. Proof that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings can lead to the most beautiful endings. Emma often reflected on that journey. From the baker's daughter who had been thrust into wealth and coldness to the woman who had found her place and her love in the most unlikely circumstances. She had learned that dignity and kindness could be more powerful than wealth and status. That patience could melt even the coldest hearts, and that love, when it finally came, was worth every moment of the wait. And Sebastian, who had once believed that marriage was simply another business transaction, had discovered that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought or negotiated. They could only be earned through vulnerability, forgiveness, and the courage to let someone see you fully. Flaws and all, on warm summer evenings, they would walk through the gardens together, hands intertwined, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying the comfortable silence that only true partners can share. And if someone asked them about their unusual beginning, they would share a knowing look and smile. "We started as a contract," Sebastian would say, "but we became so much more," Emma would finish, and really, there was no better ending to their story than that simple truth. What had begun in bitterness and obligation had transformed into something precious and real. They had taken the broken pieces of a forced arrangement and built something beautiful from them, a marriage based on choice, respect, and genuine love. In the end, Thomas Blackwood's will had been cruel in its method, but wise in its intention. He had seen what his son could not, that Sebastian needed someone who would challenge him, support him, and love him not for his wealth or status, but for the man he could become. And in Emma, he had found exactly that. The contract that had bound them was long since destroyed, torn to pieces in a moment of liberation and choice, but the bond they had forged in its place was far stronger than any legal document could ever be. It was built on a foundation of shared struggle, mutual respect, and a love that had been tested and proven true. And so, in the end, what began with the words, "You're just a signed contract," concluded with the far more powerful truth, "You are my everything." The journey from one to the other had been painful and difficult, but it had been worth every moment. Because the best love stories aren't the ones that start with ease and perfection. They're the ones that overcome obstacles, that transform pain into growth, that prove love can bloom even in the hardest soil. Emma and Sebastian's story was proof of that truth. A testament to the power of patience, forgiveness, and the courage to love even when it seems impossible. And in the years that followed, whenever they told their story to friends, to family, and eventually to their own children, they never left out the difficult parts. Because those parts were what made their love real, what made it earned, what made it unbreakable. They had started as strangers bound by a contract. They had become partners, best friends, and soulmates. And that transformation, more than any business success or social achievement, was Sebastian's greatest accomplishment and Emma's greatest victory. Together, they had turned a forced beginning into a chosen forever. And in doing so, they had proven that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones no one, not even the lovers themselves, saw coming. Thank you for taking that time to listen to this story. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to click like, share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more meaningful stories.